Craig, hi, how are you?
Joseph, it's a pleasure.
Good
Welcome.
to see you.
Yes.
Listen, thanks for taking this time to give us a tour and talk to us about the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund.
Glad to do it, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us.
Well, I'll tell you what, a lot of the corrections officers, I know a lot of them have been talking about this and this project, so we're anxious. Are we going to go outside and check out this memorial?
I'm very excited to show you our National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of names on those walls that are correctional officers, and I love the work you're doing trying to keep the names of correctional officers off those walls. We need to do more in that area.
Without you guys, they would be forgotten names, and that's why we're involved in this, and I think this is going to be a great partnership for everyone.
We're honored to do it, and I love your mission. Keep the walls bare and let every correctional officer get home to their family at night.
Roger that. Well, it's a little cold up there. Still almost springtime, so if you don't mind, let's go and walk. I'm warmed up.
Go see our daffodils.
Roger that.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little bit cold, but it's a beautiful day.
I love it, and you're going to see the daffodils in bloom down at the memorial. It's really starting to pop, and in the next couple of weeks we'll have our trees and azaleas and flowers blooming, and it's really a monument to hope. Well, this is a historical site called Judiciary Square. When they built the city of Washington, they built it around three major spaces. One was the White House grounds, seat of our executive branch of government.
Okay.
The Capitol grounds, the seat of our legislative branch of government. And Judiciary Square, which is the seat of our judicial branch of government, the seat of criminal justice in America.
Okay.
So we figured that was the perfect spot.
Are you guys government funded?
We are not. Every dollar that we raise comes from the giving public.
So no government money at all?
No government money. The government has donated the land both for the memorial and for the museum that we're now building.
Okay.
But we have received no federal dollars to date. We are hopeful that corporate America will step up for our National Museum, just like they did for the National Memorial, as well as citizens across this country.
You actually have had some nice companies actually starting to step up to the plate now.
Well, for our National Law Enforcement Museum, I'm very proud to say that a number of major corporations have stepped to the plate, including Motorola. They were the first. They came in at $3 million. DuPont followed suit at the same level, $3 million. We have Advanced Interactive Systems, AIS, a training company out of
They're one of our big
Washington.
partners.
One that I'm very proud of that just came on in the last couple of weeks, California Correctional Peace Officers Association.
One of the biggest in the country.
They are, from what I understand, one of the biggest and certainly one of the most powerful associations in America when it comes to law enforcement of any type. And they came on board at $1 million. They're going to be the official sponsor of the corrections exhibition area in the National Law Enforcement Museum. And I can't thank Mike Jimenez, the president of that group, and all his officers there in the state of California for stepping up to the plate.
They got a reputation for taking care of their boys, for taking care of those who have lost their life in the line of duty, and who also are working day to day. I mean, those guys go to battle all day long with legislations, with trying to get, with all of our COs, the equipment, the training, the right legislation to help promote safety and job security with these guys. Great outfit organization.
It's so important, and I'm especially pleased that they understood and had the vision to understand the importance of what this National Law Enforcement Museum was going to mean to this country.
Sure.
To educate Americans about the value of law enforcement service. And certainly one of the most unappreciated and least understood members of the law enforcement profession are correctional officers. We know so little about what goes on behind those walls, behind those prison walls. And thankfully, with the help of Mike Jimenez, CCPOA, Corrections USA, and a number of corrections
great organizations,
including, of course, CERDOPS.
Sure.
You're getting the message out. You're getting the message out about how important it is to include corrections as part of not only the National Memorial, where 527 correctional officers' names are proudly inscribed on those walls, but also in the National Law Enforcement Museum. Here you see the site of the National Law Enforcement Museum. Right now it's under construction. What we're seeing there is not construction of the National Law Enforcement Museum, but they are actually renovating and expanding that beautiful building behind us.
Most of the museum will be below ground?
That's correct. Congress giving us this land, they agreed with us that the National Law Enforcement Museum should be right across the street from this beautiful National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. But because of the historic nature of Judiciary Square, we talked about its historical significance going back hundreds of years. So many of the buildings that surround us here are historic landmarks, and they didn't want us to build a new modern 3 or 4 story high building that would somehow distract from this beautiful historic landmark vista. So they said build 2 beautiful entrance pavilions made out of glass above ground, and then let the visitors go down below the surface, and you'll actually have just an exciting architectural experience below ground.
Brilliant.
And here you see our pathway of remembrance. We're greeted by a female adult lion representing law enforcement, the strength, courage, valor. This is a universal symbol of those hallmarks of the law enforcement profession, overlooking a group of sleeping cubs, representing the innocent citizens of our nation. There was actually talk in the very beginning about building a monument, maybe a statue in a park somewhere, without putting the names of the fallen officers on that memorial. And almost immediately after that idea was laid out on the table, we dismissed it because we said it is so important that we honor the men and women who have made the ultimate sacrifice in law enforcement service. 527 of those names on these walls are correctional professionals that have laid down their life at some point in our nation's history. Those men and women should never be forgotten.
Two names that come up right now in corrections, and I don't mean to stop you, but you're on to something where you said 527. The 2 top names that stand out because they're in corrections. There are stories about these guys. They're Turner and Gonzalez out of California. I know they're on this wall, unfortunately, but I know they're here.
They are. Let's go down here to panel 42W, line 2, and we will talk about Andrew Turner. That's what I love about putting the names on the wall here, because once you go to the wall and you see a name, all of a sudden a story resonates within your mind, and then you share that story with visitors. And all of a sudden, Andrew Turner's life, which ended decades ago, is now revisited. We're telling stories about officers who died over 200 years ago in some cases. And that's what I love about this memorial, is that whether you died 200 years ago or whether you died last year, you will always be remembered here at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. Here he is right here, Andrew Turner, one of the officers that I will never forget. He was one of the great correctional professionals in the history of the United States, by all accounts. He was serving at Fort Leavenworth many, many years ago, back in the 1920s, I believe it was, when actually he was tending to a prisoner named Robert Stroud. And Robert Stroud had been imprisoned for murder. So he was not a good person. He was a very dangerous convicted felon. And Andrew Turner's job, like so many correctional officers in this country, have to keep the peace behind the walls of those prisons and jails. And he has to deal with people like Robert Stroud every day.
Craig, your background is, how many years were you a state trooper or a corrections officer, out of curiosity?
Never served the law enforcement profession.
And yet, for someone who is in many ways outside of our community, but who is now literally the center of our community, the passion that you have for law enforcement is incredible. And I hope, and it's really an open invitation, but when this museum gets built, and I know it's going to get built before long, and if corrections has anything to do with it, we're going to help with our part, and that's going to be our call to action, is that they get a chance to meet you. The fire, the passion, since 1984, the man who went through a lot of discouragement, and yet you won't let a man like Andrew Turner be forgotten. That's incredible. I know there's a cost to maintain this. I know there's a cost and there's a battle that you fought. You fought for those right here who many people will forget, but you fought for them, and you're fighting for them with your team. And that's why it's so important for us, for me, I know for me, to know how can we get involved? How can a warden, a superintendent, a director of a Department of Corrections get involved? Just like a lot of these PDs, the chiefs are getting involved now. For example, you mentioned Arizona, and you talked about 527 corrections officers. We have over 500,000 corrections officers today. Almost, that comes to one of almost every 1,000 officers will be killed in the line of duty. Way too many. How can we get involved?
Well, one thing I'd like to point out is that when you talk about stories like Andrew Turner, he's a name on a wall here at the National Memorial. And I have his story ingrained in my mind, and we share it with people like you every day. But too many of the visitors that come here, they don't know the story of Andrew Turner or the story behind these 18,000 names on these memorial walls. So what we're doing now is building a National Law Enforcement Museum right across the street. And that museum will open in 2011. We're on schedule for a 2011 opening. And we want to tell the stories behind these names. We want to tell Andrew Turner's story. It's inspirational to know that a man with such great character, who was, I dare say, beloved, but certainly he was respected by the corrections population that he served, the prison inmates at Fort Leavenworth in his situation. But his story needs to be told because it'll inspire others to follow in his footsteps in law enforcement and corrections service. It'll inspire the average visitor, I hope, to do more with their own lives, whether it's law enforcement or some other profession. These men and women were willing to sacrifice their lives for something they believed in. I think that should make all of us want to work a little harder and do a little more with the life that we have been given. So we're building a national museum to complement this memorial. I would encourage people, certainly the corrections population, to go to our website, which is www.lawenforcementmuseum.org, and find out more about this National Law Enforcement Museum. We launched a campaign about a year ago publicly to raise $80 million, all of it private funds that it's going to take to build the National Law Enforcement Museum. Congress gave us the land, but they didn't give us the money. They said we had to go out and raise all the money to build that museum from private donations. We've now raised over $34 million. I mentioned that the most recent large gift, over $1 million, was from the California Correctional Peace Officers Association. They cared enough about building that museum. They wanted to make sure corrections had a special place in it. So now CCPOA is one of our $1 million donors. But this is the message to correctional officers around this country. I don't care what you can afford to give. The mere fact that you're somehow invested in this project to build a National Law Enforcement Museum so the story of the corrections profession can be told here in our nation's capital at a museum that was authorized by the United States government, I think that's a very important statement that every corrections officer in this country should want to make. On behalf of the 527 correctional officers who have made the ultimate sacrifice, whose names are on these walls and whose stories will be told in that museum, I hope each and every correctional officer in America will want to be a part of this important project.
You know, you speak of California Department of Corrections, and the one name that comes out is Gonzalez, and a corrections officer from the California Department of Corrections who gave his life, I believe it was in 2005. His name is on this wall?
It is Manny Gonzalez, and one of the 527 officers across this country who serve the corrections profession that we've honored, one of dozens from the state of California. I think California, unfortunately, bears the dubious distinction of having more correctional officers killed than any other state in this country.
And today, with the museum and the memorial put together, we got to get involved. And so you want us to log on. You want us to find out more information. And then having, give me some examples of what some other agencies are doing, perhaps maybe to fundraise. I know that you have Police Week every year that goes on. How can an agency take one or two steps to start getting involved, whether it's a fundraiser or getting involved with Police Week that comes up? And really that name Police Week is something that I'd like for you to expand on a little bit about what happens during that time.
Well, National Police Week, and this was something that was started actually by a law signed by President John F. Kennedy back in 1962. It set aside the week that includes May 15th each year. May 15th is Peace Officers Memorial Day. It's a special day where we commemorate those who've made the ultimate sacrifice in law enforcement service. In 1982, through the efforts of the Fraternal Order of Police and their auxiliary, they started holding an annual ceremony here in our nation's capital on May 15th, and it's expanded from there. A couple years later, we formed the organization to build the National Memorial.
Wow.
There was a survivors group, Concerns of Police Survivors, that started in 1984. All of us together now, many groups working together, put on events during the entire week of May 15th. May 13th is our annual candlelight vigil, for example. We'll have 20,000 or more people, correctional officers, law enforcement professionals from across this country, as well as the survivors of officers killed in the line of duty, will gather on these sacred grounds here. We'll have a candlelight vigil on the evening of May 13th, and we'll honor all of the officers who've died in the line of duty, but especially those whose names we're going to be adding to the wall this year. Approximately about 350 officers' names will be added to the memorial walls during our ceremony this year in 2008.
Wow.
And 9 of those officers are correctional professionals. 5 of them died last year, and 4 died earlier in our history and had been forgotten about until our research efforts uncovered their names. So certainly we'd encourage all correctional officers across this country to join us, hopefully this year if they can. As I said, May 13th is our big event, but throughout that week there will be a number of events honoring our fallen officers and the officers who continue to serve. And if they can't join us this year, be assured that this memorial, those events will be occurring each and every year.
Can we go see Manny Gonzalez's name on the wall?
Would be honored to show. As much as we talk about those who've made the ultimate sacrifice here at the memorial, that this is all about honoring the men and women who continue to serve this country. In fact, there's a wonderful inscription. We just passed it, and it says, "It is not how these officers died that made them heroes. It is how they lived." And hopefully every officer who visits this memorial will understand that this monument is for them and their service. You don't have to die to become a law enforcement hero. The fact that you go out each and every day and literally risk your life for the safety and protection of others makes you a hero each and every day, and we want to make sure that that service is honored. And hopefully, and I know this is the important message that you go out with as part of this Extreme CERT Ops tour, which is get home at the end of your shift safely to your family.
Right. Craig, there are a lot of trends in law enforcement that's happening right now. Threats that are taking our whether police or corrections. What are some of the trends that you see going on right now?
Well, interestingly, you go back to the 1970s. That was the deadliest decade in law enforcement history. On average, we were losing 226 officers each and every year.
Right.
Many of them correctional professionals, all right? That was a tough time to be a law enforcement professional. Thankfully, through better training, better equipment, we've made a difference. And now the numbers, if you look at the last 10 years, we've averaged about 165 officers killed each year. Still an extremely high number, but far below what it was back in the 1970s. So hopefully bullet-resistant vests,
sure,
which have saved literally thousands of police
Absolutely.
lives over the last 30 years. Many correctional officers have been spared a serious injury or death because they were wearing that vest. Oftentimes in the correctional facilities, obviously, it's more of a stabbing threat versus a firearms-related threat.
As you know, if it wasn't for the California associations to really be the first in the country to mandate, mandatory vest wear for their corrections officers, today there would probably be a lot more fatalities. But that type of technology has saved those lives, and it could have been done without those organizations that have really put forth, especially in the California areas.
Well, one of our missions, in addition to increasing public support for law enforcement by commemorating and recording the service and sacrifice of law enforcement in this country, is to promote law enforcement safety. And we do that by sharing information about how officers are being killed in the line of duty. That information has proved to be invaluable in spotting dangerous trends before it really takes root. So, for instance, the auto crash fatality rate has gone up by about 34% in the last 30 years.
Goodness.
Without our statistical data to support that, I dare say that there would be a lot of trainers and policymakers in this country that wouldn't be focusing nearly as much attention on that problem. But thankfully, we identified a problem, and now it's being responded to.
We're talking about Officer Gonzalez from the Department of Corrections, and as you know, we're going to launch off here from the memorial in April, and our first stop is in California, as a matter of fact. And so we really appreciate you getting involved in that. With so many things that are going on, it's you're getting involved with the Extreme Cert Ops Tour. You know that as we started this vision, many people said, what are we going to get from it? But not the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. You said, how do we get involved? And how can we bring this to how can we help you take the tactics and take these life-saving skills to the corrections officers that are out there? Why get involved with an organization like us?
Well, look, you came to us with a wonderful opportunity, and that is how can we partner together to get the word out about this very important memorial and now the National Law Enforcement Museum. And I've told you before, Joseph, that one of my big concerns is that not enough correctional officers in this country have embraced this memorial and this museum project as their own, because frankly, a lot of correctional officers don't even realize that 527 of their colleagues' names are on these memorial walls. That correction is a vital part of what we do each and every day here at the Memorial Fund to honor the service and sacrifice of officers in America. That certainly includes each and every one of the more than 500,000 correctional officers who are serving this country. You know, I often tell a statistic, only about 1 out of 5 Americans has any direct contact with a law enforcement professional during the course of a year. Wow. And the majority of those contacts are traffic stops, all right? So what I'm saying there is that most Americans don't have a clue what law enforcement is really all about. Right. And I dare say when it comes to correctional officers, far fewer Americans have any direct contact. The only ones that do typically are the 2.3 million inmates, hardened criminals that are now behind bars, and I'm certainly not expecting many of them to say thank you to the correctional officers serving them. We want every correctional officer in America, and certainly the families of the officers we honor on these memorial walls, to know how much their work, their service, their sacrifice is appreciated by this country of ours. And I want every correctional officer in America to know about this memorial, the tribute we pay them each and every day here, as well as this museum campaign that's underway, because this is about them. And you and the Extreme Cert Ops Tour are taking that message out to the heartlands of America, meeting with correctional officers across this country, letting them know that that people care about the work they're doing and people support what they're all about. And that's why I was so excited to partner with the Extreme Cert Ops.
Craig, when a visitor comes to the memorial, and this place is just, there's no other words to put it other than breathtaking and very solemn. And yet, there's a touch here. When you look at it, it's just amazing. But with so many names, you have an officer that will come from California. They'll come from Washington State or Texas or Maine, and they come here. How do they find a colleague's name here at the memorial?
Well, every name on these walls is there in a random order. Because we knew we were going to find these names from yesteryear, and we'd have to add those names at a later date. So they're not alphabetical, they're not chronological, they're not by department or state. So what you do, very simple really, there's 4 of these directories at the entrance to each of the pathways, and you simply look up a name of an officer alphabetically in the front section of the directory, or by state and by departments within those states in the back half of the directories. And then it tells you what panel you would find a name on. And for instance, we're going now to the panels on the east wall, so this will be panel 1 through 64E, and then it tells you what line on each of those panels you can find a particular name.
And so we have 18,000 names here, and it's updated. And so with, for example, the California Department of Corrections, and I pulled them out because, as you know, they're one of the, they're the biggest corrections department in the United States, with the most, unfortunately, the most fatalities and officers who have been killed in a line of duty.
35 correctional officers from California have made the ultimate sacrifice, and they have their names now on the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. I don't think there's any department in the nation that's lost more when it comes to corrections, and that's why we're so proud to be honoring them and their officers.
We have Manny Gonzalez here. He's at 57E, line 24. Craig, as you know, with Manuel Gonzalez, you know the story, I know the story, but for the other corrections officers, maybe in Maine or Texas who don't know that story, tell us a little about it.
Well, Manny Gonzalez was a California correctional officer, and on January 10th, 2005, he was actually stabbed to death at a correctional facility by, it was basically a hit that had been put out on him by a drug gang. And so he was stabbed to death by orders of one of the gang leaders within that penitentiary at Chino in California. And so Manny was killed in the line of duty. He's forever honored here at the memorial. And one of the great parts of that story, there was a silver lining. Obviously, it was a very tragic story. But his brother, who was not a correctional officer before Manny was killed, decided as a great tribute to his brother so that his service and his service to this country would be continued, that he actually became a correctional officer after Manny's death.
One of the over 26,000 correctional officers in California now.
Well, exactly, and amazingly, and I think it's a great part of the story also, is he now serves at the same Chino facility that his brother did. You know, I've often said that as beautiful as this monument is, this memorial to fallen officers, the greatest tribute of all to the men and women who have made the ultimate sacrifice are the nearly 1 million law enforcement professionals across this country who now follow in their footsteps, carry on their tradition of service and sacrifice.
You know, what's amazing is behind every one of these names, there's a story. And behind every story, it is never forgotten, because the memorial and the museum now has encapsulated that and will carry it on to the future.
Exactly.
That's an amazing tribute.
Here's panel 57E, and there on line 24, you see the name Manuel Gonzalez Jr. And Manny Gonzalez's story will be told over and over here at the National Memorial, and most importantly, when we build the National Law Enforcement Museum across the street in the Hall of Remembrance, Manny Gonzalez will be forever remembered, and his story will be told repeatedly.
You know, Craig, I really appreciate your time and what you've done for us, and just taking this time, but most of all getting involved in tour, because with a number of organizations out there, they're always asking, what do I get out of it? And the truth is, that didn't come out of your mouth. You're like, great, how can we get involved and take the life-saving skills, you know, to these officers so that not another name will go on these walls. And I want you to know that with CERTOPS, US-CSOG, when our guys get out there and they train for that day, you're one of the catalysts that help bring this tour to every one of those corrections officers. Our goal is to touch 1,000 correctional facilities this year. And you're one of the commander-level sponsors that have jumped on and said, yes, whatever it takes, let's get the message out there. I can't thank you enough for that. And I'm going to make sure that these corrections officers know that the life-saving skills that they're going to be getting, you're one of the main reasons behind it. And before they ever asked, nobody asked to be included in this, you said, bring them in. They're still part of law enforcement. I can't thank you enough for that.
Well, it's such an important part of the law enforcement profession. Correctional officers across this country, more than 500,000 of them, going into those facilities each and every day, putting their life at risk so that this nation can be a bit safer. And, you know, it's a service, it's a sacrifice that is unsung, that correctional officers, probably as much as any other part of the law enforcement community, are not fully appreciated, nor is their work fully understood. Hopefully, through this memorial, through the National Law Enforcement Museum, people are going to have a much better understanding and appreciation for the work of correctional professionals across this country. And if we accomplish that goal, I'll be a very proud and privileged person.
You know, looking at these tigers, I'll never, you know, when I see it now, it's just, wow, I get a different perspective. And, you know, in valor there is hope.
It's a beautiful inscription. We wanted this to kind of be the end of the memorial experience. We realized people could enter from any which way here. But to us, this was the message we wanted people to leave with. In valor, there is hope. This is a Greek philosopher named Tacitus who is attributed with that quote. He said it hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But what we liked about this is basically it's saying that because of men and women in this country serving the law enforcement profession, willing to put their lives at risk for the safety and protection of others, there is indeed great hope for this nation of ours and for the future of our world and for the future of our children. So this is the essence of this memorial experience. In valor, there is hope. As long as there are men and women going out there each and every day putting their lives at risk for our safety, our protection, there is indeed great hope for this nation.
Craig, thank you so much. I really appreciate this time. Operators, this place here in Washington, D.C., the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. Not only is it a memorial, but it's a museum as well. It's a museum, it's a memorial that doesn't speak of death, but speaks of life. We know that behind these walls in the United States, it is the most violent prison system in the world. The National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund has done something this year. At the Extreme Sword Ops 2008 tour, they've partnered with us so that others may live, the tactics, the training. When you come here, and if you want to find out how to get involved and let us take ownership of the corrections. Let us step forward and join with Craig Floyd and the National Law Enforcement Officer Memorial Fund and help raise this museum so that the names here, the 18,000, and most of all, for our side, the 527, that has not been forgotten. And if it had been any other organization, they may have been forgotten. If it had been any other man and any other group of people, they may have forgotten. But every detail is constantly being looked. Have they forgotten anybody? You have been included. This organization has been included. Simply go to lawienforcementmuseum.org and find out more information. This year, when the Sword Ops tour comes around, take a disc, look at the video, and take time to go back to your administrators and ask them to get involved. I'm Team Leader Garcia from here in Washington, D.C. at the National Law Enforcement Officers Fund, the memorial, and soon the future site of the museum, saying thank you very much for watching this segment of In the Cert Know.